The 6 factors that determine your settlement value, plus the one thing that makes the biggest difference between 20,000 and 200,000. If you have a back injury from work in North Carolina, I know exactly what you're doing right now. You're lying in bed or sitting in the one position that doesn't make it worse, and you're typing into Google, how much is my workers' comp back injury worth? And you're getting garbage answers. It depends. Every case is different. Consult an attorney. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to give you the real numbers, actual ranges, and I'm going to walk you through the 6 factors that determine where your case falls in those ranges. Because a back strain and a spinal fusion are not the same case, and a 20% disability rating at $600 a week is a completely different settlement than a 20% rating at $1,100 per week. But here's what I really want you to pay attention to. 5 of these 6 factors are mostly out of your control. They're determined by your injury, your wages, your doctor. But the 6th one, the one factor that makes the biggest difference between a $20,000 settlement and a $200,000 settlement, that one is something that you can actually influence, and most people have no idea it even exists. I'm Ken King. I'm a North Carolina workers' comp attorney. Let's get into the numbers. Not all back injuries are created equal, and the insurance company knows that. So let's break this down into 3 tiers, because that's roughly how settlement values shake out in North Carolina. Tier 1, soft tissue injuries, strains, sprains, muscle tears. These are the cases where you didn't herniate a disc, you don't need surgery, and you're expected to recover with physical therapy and time. In North Carolina, these cases typically settle in the range of $15,000 to $40,000. Still real money, still a real injury, but the lowest tier. Tier 2 are referred to as herniated or bulging discs, especially L4, L5, L5S1. These are the most common serious back injuries I see in workers' comp. If you've got a confirmed herniated disc on MRI, maybe you've had epidural injections, maybe surgeries on the table, these cases typically are $40,000 to $150,000. Tier 3, or surgical cases, discectomy, laminectomy, spinal fusion. If you've had surgery or your doctor's recommending surgery, you're in a different universe. Smaller fusion cases in North Carolina typically settle between $100,000 and $300,000, depending on the specific factors. Your injury type sets the floor, but it's the next 5 factors that determine how high above that floor you go. And factor number 6, the one most people miss, can move your number up more than any of the others. Surgery dramatically changes the math. In North Carolina workers' comp, a case that involves surgery is worth more for several reasons. The medical bills are higher, but most importantly, surgery means a higher disability rating, longer time out of work, and a greater chance that you'll have permanent restrictions that affect your ability to do the job you've always done. Here's a real-world example. 2 construction workers, same injury, herniated disc at L5S1, same average weekly wage. One gets conservative treatment, physical therapy, injections, and goes back to work with mild limitations. The other needs a spinal fusion, is out for 8 months, and a surgeon says he can never do heavy lifting again. The first case might sell for $35,000. The second one could be worth $200,000 or more. Same disc, same job. The difference is what the injury required and what it left behind. Factor number 3, your disability rating. Once your doctor says you've reached maximum medical improvement, or MMI, meaning your condition isn't going to get significantly better or worse with more treatment, they assign you a disability rating. This is a percentage that represents the permanent loss of function to your back. In North Carolina, back injuries fall under North Carolina General Statute 97-31. The back is assigned 300 weeks. The formula is simple. Your disability rating percentage times 300 weeks times your compensation rate equal your PPD benefits. So if you receive a 15% disability rating and your compensation rate is $700 per week, that's 15% of 300 times 700 equals $31,500 in PPD. If that rating increases to 30%, the number doubles to $63,000. The rating doubled, the PPD value has doubled. That's how much this number matters. Factor number 4, your average weekly wage. Your compensation rate in North Carolina is 66 2/3% of your average weekly wage. The more you were earning before your injury, the more every week of benefits is worth, and the higher your settlement. Here's a simple comparison. A worker makes $600 per week, compensation rate $400, with a 20% back rating. He's entitled to $24,000 in PPD. Worker B makes $1,200 per week, compensation rate $800. Same 20% rating, but $48,000 in PPD. Same injury, same rating, double the wages, double the settlement value. And your average weekly wage isn't always just your base rate times 40 hours. It can include overtime, per diem, employer-paid benefits, and other compensation depending on the circumstances. Getting that number calculated correctly can add thousands to your claim. The insurance company is not going to calculate it in your favor. Factor number 5, whether you can return to your old job. This is where cases separate into two very different paths. If you can return to your old job or a job earning similar wages, your case is generally limited to your PPD. That's the scheduled benefit we just calculated. But if your injury prevents you from returning to your pre-injury job, or if you can only work in a lower paying position because of your permanent restrictions, you may be entitled to benefits under TPD or PPD, depending on your wage loss and your wage earning capacity. And that changes everything. Imagine a 45-year-old construction worker who undergoes a spinal fusion. His surgeon places permanent restrictions, no lifting over 20 pounds, no prolonged bending, no repetitive twisting. He can't return to construction. He has limited transferable skills. Now we're not just talking about a PPD rating, we're talking about lost earning capacity for years into the future. Instead of a $60,000 settlement based solely on the rating, the case could be worth $200,000 or more because it must account for income he can no longer earn. This is a factor that turns 5-figure cases into 6-figure cases. Quality of medical documentation, the number one factor. Your disability rating comes from your doctor. If your doctor wants a detailed evaluation that fully captures your limitations, specific range of motion measurements, clear functional restrictions, specific to activities you can no longer perform, you're more likely to receive an accurate rating. If the report, on the other hand, is vague, rushed, or incomplete, your rating may be lower, not because your injury is less severe, but because the documentation is weaker. The same goes for permanent restrictions. Avoid heavy work is vague. No lifting over 15 pounds, no standing longer than 30 minutes, no repetitive bending at the waist is specific, measurable, and defensible. Insurance companies prefer vague records. Vague documentation leads to lower ratings, weaker restrictions, and easier arguments that you can return to your old job. The surgery and the injury happened to you, but the quality of your medical documentation is something you can influence by being honest and detailed with your doctors about every symptom and limitation, and by making sure those details are clearly recorded. I've seen cases where better medical documentation alone moved a settlement from $35,000 to $120,000. Same injury, same person, better records. That's the one factor that changes everything. But your employer isn't the only one working against you. The insurance company has its own playbook, completely separate from what your boss is doing. And trick number 3 on the list is something that most injured workers never see coming until it's already cost them thousands of dollars. I break down all 5 of their tactics in this video right here. I'd watch that next.